Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Greet your neighbors. I was doing a little research on why I saw that name. Our invitation today will be given by John Scott.
Please bow your heads. I am blessed to have a job I love. I'm blessed to have good friends. I'm blessed to be a member of Rotary. I'm blessed with the ability to make a difference through my job, my friends, and through Rotary. May our acts as Rotarians demonstrate our gratitude to you for our blessings, our friendships, our vocations, for our health, and for opportunities to gather together to enjoy a meal and plan work that will change our community for the better. We ask your blessing to be on the food prepared for us this day and for the strong and dedicated hands that have prepared it. May this meal and this fellowship of friends strengthen our bodies and our minds for our journey in service. Empower us this week to be brave and to do only good work in your name. Amen.
All right, well, welcome everybody. I was telling Lynn, I think I'm striking out on all at bats today. I forgot, for you Zoomers, I forgot my external camera that I usually bring, which hopefully today won't be as much of a problem for you since our speaker is on Zoom. And I also, Greg entrusted me with the money bag that I was supposed to bring. I forgot that too. So I'm not starting out too well, and I'm blaming it on the rain. So all the rain over the weekend, I think, just got me out of sorts, but I guess we can't complain too much, right? We've had some pretty nice weather. Appreciated reading about, I think Lynn forwarded on some of the sports happening at Wooster High School. So the Maverick sisters making it to state. What a great run that they had. And Chad's daughter as well, advancing very far in the tennis tournament. So that was great. Also read today that the boys soccer team is doing really well. We'll be playing again this Wednesday night. So it's good to see some success at Wooster High School in athletics. Also, wanted to make sure you knew that in the weekly email that I sent out, I put a link to the 100th anniversary dinner video. So for those of you who were unable to attend that event, you can find it on YouTube and that link that I sent out. Also got a nice thank you card here today from Susan English. She's the spouse of Bill here. And she was just thanking us for inviting her to the dinner. I think that was a great idea that Phil had to invite some of the widows of members of the club. So she was appreciative of being invited. Also yesterday, I'm not sure if anybody saw the emails, but it was World Polio Day. There were some online presentations. There was a longer one, which was like 28 minutes. I watched a shorter 4-minute message. But it sounds as if things are going really well. I think the statistic that they gave last year that they only had 2 reported cases this year so far, one in Pakistan, one in Afghanistan. There was a lot of concern about Afghanistan, and still is, about how they're going to continue to fight the polio threat there, given the political instability in the country. But it was interesting to hear the message on that. And I know a lot of clubs in the district have donated quite a bit of money to the polio eradication effort. So there's another strikeout. I don't really have the Today in History slide, but I will say that Today in History, in October 25th, 2001, Windows XP was officially available for sale. And I was wondering how many versions came after that, and I tried to look at it. Andrew, I'm looking at you. I don't know. There were so many. I think they said the one that replaced XP was Vista. And they said XP ran the longest. So. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Lynn and the secretary's report.
Thank you, President Terry. And I understand this was a very dangerous move and take full responsibility. Past President and past Secretary Tim Swift has the microphone. Welcome, Natalie, and good move changing that last name. I will pay for that later, I know. Frank Relly has an announcement while he's coming forward. I would like to draw your attention to the President Terry sends out the meeting notification each week. And on the bottom of that, something that looks like this. It's a schedule of upcoming programs. And I mention that for two reasons. Just to say thank you to our exceptional program committees. They do a fine job. We have great programs every week. So thank you, Dee Vidia, Doug Druschel, Don Noble, and Kim Sayers for that. And number two, last week you received another new member proposal, and that new member was interested because President Terry invited him to a program. So when you look through those, think of potential new members, your spouse, family, maybe even a coworker who would just be interested in that program. So thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Lynn. Our annual Veterans Day recognition meeting will be on Monday, November 8th to honor their service. Our speaker is a Worcester native, with this club sent to a village 60 miles from the Arctic Circle in Sweden as one of its very first outbound exchange students in 1966. Her maiden name was called Garthright or Gathright, and she realized these historical information about her club, and she remembered seeing David Gallagher's name there as one of her teachers. 2 years after earning her college degree from the University of Florida, she enlisted in the U.S. Air Force as a second lieutenant, retired as a lieutenant colonel. She married John Roderick, who also retired as an Air Force lieutenant. During her Air Force career, she was one of the very few women who helped break the glass ceiling for women in the military. She was often the first woman to serve in numerous high-level capacities, such as participation in the bilateral military negotiations between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And she was she was the only woman officer in the military to command a ground-launched cruise missile combat unit. She was very saddened to hear about General Colin Powell's recent death, since she was part of his staff. So I hope you all join us in person or on Zoom for representation to honor our local veterans. If you would like to include your Rotary veteran names or the names of Rotary members in the families that were veterans in our annual bulletin, you still have time. Please email me or text me. My number is 330-749-5141. That's 749-5141. And we encourage you to invite as many non-return veterans to be our guest at our annual luncheon. Also, if you have a larger than normal group of veterans invited, please let me know as soon as possible so our kitchen staff can accommodate those meals.
Thank you, Frank. And thanks again for organizing that event. I know that it takes a lot of organization to pull that one off. Looking forward to having that speaker here. Welcome, Natalie. Good to have you here again. Congratulations to you. I remember you as a much younger version of you running around the auction years ago, so it's good to have you back with us. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Doug Detrow, who's going to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, President Terry. On a warm late summer day in 1965, one kid who had just finished up at Parkview Elementary School and another from Bell Avenue Elementary School walked into Bowman Junior High School, structure since torn down, which is located at the corner of Bowman and Grant Streets, adjacent to the old high school, which now houses Cornerstone Elementary. Even though they had both walked uphill the whole way, not to mention uphill, they were eager to meet new people. And apparently done by alphabetical order, Detrow and Druschel were assigned to share a locker, and thus began a friendship which has endured over the intervening 56 years. Jon Detrow, our speaker today, was active in band and speech at Wooster High School, also involved in the radio production team, which did things like the morning announcements. Boy, did we have great morning announcements. Jon's a member of the Wooster High School Fine Arts Hall of Fame. And even before graduating from Wooster High School, Jon began his more than 50-year radio career when he was hired at the local radio station, then going by the call letters WWST. That was in the fall of his freshman year in high school. And at age 16, he was part of the team that kept the station on the air all night during the deadly 4th of July, 1969 flood. Jon went on to local radio jobs in Columbus, at the legendary CKLW in Windsor and Detroit, in Toronto, Vancouver, back in Detroit, before going on to network news positions at ABC in New York and the Associated Press in Washington, D.C. Jon ended his career and recently retired from the all news 1010 WINS or 1010 WINS in New York City. When we would drive to New York in recent years, I would turn the car radio to 1010 and get a kick out of hearing Jon's distinctive voice, reading the news with the same flair I remembered from 50 years ago. Jon is married to Pam for 42 years, still living in New York City, hoping to winter in Florida. They have 2 adult children who you'll hear more about later. Jon requested that rather than give the traditional 20-minute monologue, that instead we do more of a conversation between the two of us. So that's what we'll do, still reserving time at the end for your questions. So let's get started and bear with us, hoping that the technology works. Jon, welcome. And let's start out by telling the crowd who were the earliest influencers and how did you get started in radio?
Well, Doug, if you can see the picture in the middle, I wanted to tell you that even though I started in radio at age 14, my grandson, who's 3, may be looking to eclipse me. This is Josh in his dad's studio in Washington, D.C. His dad, my son Scott, is a White House correspondent for NPR, but he has a back bedroom where he puts up a stop sign that says Daddy's on the radio, and Josh can only come in when it turns green and allows him, but occasionally he gets there and likes to play with the gear. So I'm going to take him down now. And you have me?
Yes.
Okay, great. And what was your question, counselor?
Who were the earliest influencers of you? How'd you get started in radio?
Okay. Well, I'll show you one more picture here for now, if I can do it smoothly, because this is the big guy who influenced me. I got to do this. Hang on. We're not going to bore you with all this technology. Okay, you can see him. That is a Worcester native, Jack Perkins, who I did not know except I met him a couple of times, but he had a wonderful on-air style, had a lot of color in his voice. And when I was a young guy and wanted to be in network radio, most of the network radio correspondents were old and bombastic and talked very authoritarian. And I wanted to talk like a real person. And Jack Perkins, with the way he used his voice so colorfully, was a major influence on me, especially coming from my hometown. So I met him when he came to speak at high school graduation and once more in later years. But other influences were when I went to CKLW and worked for Byron McGregor, 2020 News. And he had a very distinctive style. And then I later went on and worked in Toronto with the guy who had taught Byron, a guy named Dick Smythe, who passed recently. And I've told people, you know, if you have people in the family, any of you Rotarians have any young people who are interested in media, the way you develop your persona, your act, is to see what talent you like, you sample that, and then you synthesize it, and sooner or later you are who you are. So it came together over the years, Doug.
The old timers in the club will remember Ted Evans, who was the manager of WWST. And I know I've often heard you say that working there was a great help in your career for allowing you to know how to pronounce the letter W.
That's
since
correct.
You had to do it WWST. Can you tell us any stories about Ted Evans for the old timers here?
Well, Ted Evans was the boss, which allowed him to steal Cokes out of the Coke machine. A Coke was a dime in those days. And we had one of those machines that had an aluminum front that hid behind a fake plastic door. And Ted learned how to reach his hand underneath the edge of the aluminum, sneak out a dime, put it in the slot, and serve himself a Coke. But he was a good boss, and he would come, excuse me, he'd come in the studio in the middle of your show if you weren't doing it right, and he'd say, W, 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 W. And he wanted to, you know, it was 2 W's and an ST, and he wanted to hear those come out nice and crisply. And I failed to mention when you first asked, I should have said that my first mentor in the business also has passed on. The entire generation that hired me is gone. And that was Alan Lang, who was the chief announcer. And people who are old enough to remember will know that he did the Daily Record Report every afternoon at 3 o'clock, which consisted of reading the front page in the newspaper on the air, plus the obituaries. They were very important.
Have you always done news, or did you ever do any other aspect of radio?
When I was a kid in Wooster, I did everything. We had an FCC license, so you operated and calibrated the transmitters. I was a teenage DJ. I read the news off the UPI ticker, and I was ambitious enough to make some local news calls because I was interested in that. I kind of thought that that's where my future lay. And my brother Jeff, who's on the Zoom today watching, he is younger than I am, and he followed me at the station a few years later. And I knew he had the personality to be a DJ, and I was more of a straight-laced guy who probably could read and write the news.
You mentioned license there. Tell us, is it required that everybody who goes out over the air have a license from the FCC?
I don't, the license was to operate the equipment, the transmitter. You didn't have to have a license to be a broadcaster. And I don't know if that exists in deregulation. I don't know if that exists anymore today. But we had what was called a third-class license. My grandfather drove me up to the Federal Building in Cleveland to take the test. There were a lot of pimply-faced and nervous guys there from Career Academy, which was the broadcasting school in Cleveland. They were sweating the test, but I didn't find it too difficult at all.
Some of the old timers in the room will also remember your dad, Jon Detrow, who worked at the city of Wooster, city administrator. Tell us about your parents and how they looked on your career choice.
Well, starting at 14, I could hardly drive to work, and they were always very glad to drive me no matter what hour of the day or night. My father would call me with pronunciation corrections, which was greatly appreciated. He would be listening, and what was one? I had an Annette spot where I said tricot, which was an early polyester, and he corrected me with tricot. He called me in Windsor once when I talked about the Sheraton Viscount Hotel. No, that's a Viscount. That was a World War II fighter plane. So he kept me honest. And he also, we'll be talking about this, I think, he drove me out to the station the night in 1969 after the skies had opened and the creeks were flooding.
Also, we don't need to talk about this, but just for the folks in the audience, the Detrow name is still around Wooster indirectly, and that John's cousin, Sid, runs Ray Crow Cleaners. And last name's not Detrow anymore, but there's a local connection there. That anybody who has clean clothes probably deals with Ray Crow.
The only dry cleaner left in Wayne County, and they won an award, Small Business of the Year. I was proud of her.
You just mentioned your brother Jeff, who is, as you mentioned, is on the Zoom here, also had a successful career in radio. Tell us about his career. You mentioned it was different,
Right.
but still on the radio. Tell us a little bit about that. And we won't ask Jeff to chime in so you guys won't get into it this way.
Well, since I started at 14, when he turned 14 and he had the same voice, they offered him a job, cheap labor at $1.40 an hour. And my mom said, look, here's the deal. Your dad works for the city. Your brother works at the radio station. You can either mow lawns this summer or work in radio. He took the easier route and had a very successful career, being part of a top-rated morning team in San Diego for more than 30 years. After he left San Diego, he did contemporary Christian radio at K-Love for a while. And now he's retired and living in Tennessee. But when I wanted to be a morning host at one point, one of the reasons I wanted to be a host rather than a newsman was to emulate my brother, who's just a very talented guy. He still is a better host than I.
You mentioned the '69 flood. I mentioned that in the intro also. Tell us a little bit about that and the war stories from what you did during the '69 flood.
Okay, let me share the screen again for just a couple more pictures, because one is from the flood. This won't take long. Okay, that's Jack. This is me in the studio. Can you see the picture, Doug?
Yeah.
This is me in the studio.
You're on the left.
Right. At age 16, across from me was station manager Reed Welty. And we were on the air the day after the flood. This was July 5th. This is an old archive photo from the Daily Record. And I confirmed it was from the flood because you can see a July 1969 calendar on the back. We had been at the fireworks when they were on the college golf course. Everybody bailed about a little after 9 that night when the skies opened up. My family went home, but already we knew that there was trouble. So my dad drove me out to the radio station. And at that time, the FM signed off at midnight, but we knew that this was an emergency, a true emergency. So we not only kept the FM on, but we signed the AM station back on. It operated during the daytime only at that time. And just kept in touch with police, with the Akron Canton. It was then the Weather Bureau, not National Weather Service, and would play some music, but break in quite often with updates. By 3 a.m., people already were calling in with missing persons reports. At 4 a.m., I was on the phone with the police department, and the dispatcher said, "I've got to go. We've just lost 2 units." I didn't know what that meant at the time, but that's when 2 officers were lost in a boat. They had gone out to rescue people, and the boat capsized, and the officers, Nisley and Goodrich, were gone. So I learned some military and police slang that night that we lost 2 units. That was a terrible time, and I think from the anniversary coverage in the Daily Record, they reported that in the area, there were 22 souls that were lost in that terrible flood. We had flash flooding in New York City a couple of months ago, and people drowned in basement apartments. So I would encourage you, and you all get the alerts on your cell phones now. When you hear a flash flood warning, that's serious stuff. A flash flood watch means it could happen, but a flash flood warning means that water could be rolling in from the Killbuck or wherever, and that wall of water in a real downpour can come very quickly. And if you're in a vulnerable position, you don't have much time to move. So that was, that felt good to serve the community that way and stay on through the next morning, having the stamina of a 16-year-old. And it was very gratifying when I was in Wooster in June to attend Bill Patterson's funeral. And a guy at the McIntyre Funeral Home recalled hearing me on the radio then. So, wow, old guy gets remembered.
You've had a number of different jobs. What's the best job you've ever had?
Well, that was at ABC. I worked at ABC for nearly 20 years in New York. We lived in New Jersey and worked in the city. We still have regular reunions when there's not a pandemic. And at the time, we were all young, ambitious, worked with some very bright, very funny, very talented people. And I feel close to them to this day. It was just a great time. 19 good years there.
We've talked a little bit about your family. Your family had to be supportive of you. I assume you were gone a lot of time and you didn't really have an option. And when you were on the air, you had to be on the air. How'd that work out with Pam and when the kids were little?
Well, I'll tell a good story and then a bad story. I had a go bag in my locker. And even though I was mainly an anchor in the studio, when they needed another body out in the field to report, I would go. And my wife was very supportive in getting me prepped for that. The night that TWA 800 went down off Long Island, I got a call at home that they wanted me to go out there. She not only filled a thermos and packed a lunch, but ran and filled the car with gas while I was putting my things together. And off I went into the darkness of that night. And if you recall, that was quite a scene. There were flames in the water from the jet fuel that was burning. So that's to her credit. And this is to her credit too, but it's to my embarrassment. Once when I was staying in a hotel in the city during a blizzard, I had the nerve to call home and say, you know, I just had a wonderful steak dinner. I'm here with my colleague, Jim. We're having a lovely bottle of wine. How are things going there? Well, we've been shoveling for several hours. The snow has filled up the window wells. And if it doesn't flood in the basement, we're going to continue our Monopoly game. She's a real trooper. And I never would have made it without her. She helped me. She helped me build the confidence to get the network job in New York, and then kept me going all those years.
Let's move down the family tree. You mentioned your son. For those who listen to NPR, they certainly know the name and maybe didn't know the Wooster connection. But tell us about Scott's career.
He went into radio against my advice. I told him, you know, this is a dying medium, but he started in college radio at Fordham University, and after Fordham went on to a public station in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and he had his sights set on NPR in Washington. He covered the State House in Harrisburg for several years, followed by a couple of years at the State House in Sacramento, California, and ended up with that job at NPR that he wanted. And I must say that radio is a rapidly shrinking industry, but NPR is still a healthy and I think important news organization. So he's done very well there. They promoted him. He's a White House correspondent now, and he'll be going with President Biden to Europe this week, including a stop in Rome, where my Jesuit educated son hopes to be in the pool when the president meets the Pope.
You have a daughter too. Tell us about her, and I believe there's a Rotary connection there.
There is a Rotary connection, not the Fit 60s group, if you recall them. You remember an artsy group called Rotary Connection?
I do not.
It's old DJ talk. No, she was very fortunate when, and I didn't mention this in my bio that I gave you, but I had a stop in Milwaukee as well. And I was a Rotarian in Milwaukee. And she was an exchange student, went to Germany first. Being German Americans, I never spoke the language, but she's great with languages. She had a wonderful year in Germany, came back, and as a gap year after she graduated from high school, went again. I don't know if you're aware, but occasionally Rotary will sponsor you a second time around. And she went to Mexico that year. And since she speaks about 6 languages, and went back to Germany, spent 7 years in Europe, married a Luxembourger, and then came back to the States, where she now works for the German government in New York, a cultural exchange program of theirs. And I think, to her credit, when she was in Germany, they couldn't tell she was an American. They thought her accent sounded like a Dutch person speaking German, but she didn't sound like a Yank.
We have people around here who have a Dutch accent. I think it's a little different.
You're talking Pennsylvania Dutch.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Tell us about some interesting people you've met over the years, either covering them or schmoozing with them or what have you.
Well, I've never done a White House news conference, unlike my son. I did get to cover the space shuttle for the Associated Press, and so I was in news conferences with astronauts. I went down to Houston before the final shuttle launch in 2011 and interviewed that crew. I've always been a fan of the astronauts. Oh, here's a guy. He came out the other night for our Wooster High School class reunion. Is that showing up or not? I think the green screen. This is John Glenn. John Glenn in his pumpkin suit when he went up the second time at age 76. So that was a real honor to be able to cover shuttles. And I guess there's a thing, New Yorkers especially, but media people as well. When you meet a celebrity, you don't overreact. Like if you see someone on the street, the most you're expected to do is, "Hi there, nice work, appreciate you." But a couple of times at ABC, I would, after our celebrity interviewer was done with his interviews, I'd hop in the elevator and ride down with somebody just to hear them talk. One of them was Richard Harris. I wanted to hear his magnificent voice. And I can tell you that when both Ed Asner and George Wendt from Cheers came in the newsroom, they all got a, "Hi, Lou, how you doing?" But no, I've never really rubbed elbows with the truly rich and famous.
Present company accepted, of course. How has broadcast news evolved over your career? And talk a little bit about the polarization that appears evident in both radio and television news today.
Well, before I badmouth the polarization, which has affected us, I will tell you that whether liberal or conservative, many news consumers now want that. They want to have their personal spin on the news be reflected back to them. I've always been a mainstream media guy, just dealing in the facts. I tried to overlay the facts with a bit of humanity to make the news sound interesting, to make it sound real and warm. But I understand why people seek out either MSNBC or Fox News, and even CNN no longer shoots straight down the middle. And I think that in a way serves the audience. It certainly can boost the ratings, but it's also worked against us, where you've had generations raised on, starting when Rush Limbaugh first became a national figure, with people undermining the mainstream media so that everybody now is welcome to their own set of facts. And in order to deal with many things, especially this pandemic, you need to be dealing with the straight facts. You need to know what's really out there so you can make your own personal decisions. On the other hand, I'll say that both the on-air people and the talking heads they interview in the news have become much more relaxed, much more real over the years. When I was first in the business and you'd put a mic in somebody's face, you would get some very wooden responses. And I recall scientists always would talk scientific talk. And I think we've seen during the pandemic, we've seen how the younger scientists are much more relatable than the white coats were in my early days.
One thing I've noticed is quite a transformation to much more talk radio. WKSU, for example, here locally, used to have NPR and then classical music, and that was it. And now after NPR is over in the morning, WKSU goes to talk until I think midnight. Tell us about how that evolved.
That is something that the public radio consultants discovered benefited fundraising. Even though classical music has a very dedicated niche audience, the public radio stations discovered that by going to talk throughout the day, they had more listeners and they had more generous listeners who were willing to support the format. So increasingly across the country, public radio is wall-to-wall talk with the various services they can bring in. NPR has grown its roster of talk shows. And also there's BBC World Service, and you have the independent stations like WBUR in Boston, WNYC in New York that offer programming. So that's something that, even though public radio doesn't say it follows the ratings, it is, because the ratings drive contributions and the underwriting. So that's something you're sharp to pick up on, and there's a reason for it.
Tell us a little bit about, you mentioned you were back in Worcester recently, and I know you visited the Worcester radio station then. Tell us about that visit and what was the same and what was different.
Let me backtrack on one thing, not to throw you off, but one more thing I wanted to say about the change in media is that whether you think the media are liberal or conservative, a major driving force on the media is conflict. Conflict engages the viewers and brings them in. Also, fear will drive people. And the reason I bring this up is not to criticize them. I'm not going to change their patterns, but to encourage people, as I did with my listeners on 9/11, that at some point you can't be driven by fear. And during a major crisis, you need to take a mental health break from the media, gather your family together, and just be grateful for what you have. Don't let, whether it's a fire that's on the local news or whether it's a shooting, don't let fear of crime or whatever drive your entire life. You're the person who decides your life. Just a small moment of preaching there. And your question, Doug, I forget.
Your recent visit to the Wooster radio station.
Oh, that was great. I mean, the place is totally different. What had been the AM control room obviously is now FM. AM is not that important anymore. The staff is smaller, but my brother and I visited and they were very welcoming. And we had a nice visit. It was great. It was great. We took some pictures and Jeff went rummaging in the attic and took home a speaker that the boss told him he could have. So he not only has a speaker, but he has one of those old radio microphones that has the call letters down here. So he has a WWST mic at home.
Nice souvenir. But you mentioned a couple times radio is dying. I don't think it's quite dead yet, but what do you foresee for the future of radio?
Well, it's something you can do and have it on in the background. Although I will say that people use morning television that way these days. They'll turn on the Today Show and it's there in the background. There were people I worked with who said it was going to be gone more than a decade ago. We're still here. As long as I think this, as long as there are car radios, as long as people want to listen to either terrestrial radio or satellite radio in their cars, want to hear the traffic, want to hear the weather, I think we still have a future. And the talk shows, Rush was a major ratings for us and he's gone, but the talk shows continue and they're popular with some people. I mentioned public radio, it's a good service. So I don't think they're going to sign off the last station just yet.
Finally, wrap up before we take some questions.
Sure.
When you meet people around the country, how do you describe Wooster?
Well, I'll tell you, some people tell me that they don't know others who are as proud of their hometown as my brother and I are. We talk about it a lot. I say it is a small town that once was in the country and now it's an exurb of Cleveland. The Cleveland TV anchors know how to pronounce Wooster these days. And I just tell them it was great to come from a small town where family was very important and we had a good upbringing. But in my business, to move up, you have to move on, and that's why I did. At one point, I considered moving back. I was 35. I had lost my voice and was off the air for 7 weeks because of a growth in my throat caused by stomach acid. And after surgery, I had to stay quiet and couldn't work. So I considered coming back to Worcester at that time. I even talked to you about it, asked if you had any job tips. But the best, the best silly idea I had is I told my wife, I had this high school math teacher, Dick Kinder, who went into real estate. Maybe I could sell real estate for Dick. And she said, John, I can just see you. It's Sunday afternoon, you're at an open house, and you're telling the clients, look, are you going to buy it or not? Because I want to take a nap. So the real estate career never came to be. I never moved back to town, but I'm very proud to be from there. And I'm glad I finally got back after nearly 2 years, and I look forward to coming back again.
Very good. With that, let's see if anybody has a question in the audience or on the Zoom land. Back there, Sue has a question.
What was it like for you personally to make the transition from radio to?
Could you hear that?
No, go ahead.
She asked if you transitioned from radio to television ever.
That's a great question. I did a couple of weeks of fill-in TV at Channel 9 in Windsor when I worked at CKLW. And after I'd been in radio about 15 years, I came home and my grandmother said, John, you ever think of doing television? I said, well, Grandma, this radio thing's working out pretty well. So I never had the fire in my belly for TV. And as they say, I've always had a face for radio.
And a voice for radio. Anybody else? Any on chat and Zoom? Okay, I guess those are the only questions. Any parting wisdom for us, John, before we wrap up?
Well, I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I do have some underlying health conditions and decided not to come to town for our class reunion over the weekend. But I really appreciate your invitation to be here today. And I grew up in the First Presbyterian Church. I'm glad to see you're there for the meeting. I can tell you one funny story about growing up in the Presbyterian Church. There was a time that my brother and I somehow heard, this is during the Red Scare, that there was a communist in every church. And Jeff and I decided there was a short guy who would walk around with the money bag and collect the money from the collection plate. I do not know the man's name, but since he was a short and suspicious man, we decided he was the communist. So beware, you never know.
On that note, we thank you, and I'll turn it back over to President Terry for some parting remarks.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, John, for taking time to be with us here today. Talk about your career in media. I know I always remember when I was a kid, in the mornings, WWST was always on the radio when we got up, got ready for school. My mother always had that on. I can still remember the jingles to some of the commercials, the advertisers on there. I think I listened a little more in the winter when I was hoping for a school cancellation, but I certainly remember those days. So also interested to hear that money not only drives behavior everywhere else, but also at NPR. So programming at NPR is driven by donations. So thanks again, John, for being here. We do have a little memento for you that I'll work with Doug. Hopefully we'll get it mailed to you for your time here with us today. So thank you.
Sure,
Just
thank
want to
you.
echo Lynn's comments again about programming here and our program chairs. They do a great job of bringing folks in. We always thought that this format on Zoom not only gave our members an opportunity to join remotely, but also bring in some speakers that couldn't otherwise come. So I think this worked out great today. Thank you, Doug. Next week, just a reminder, we will have Dr. Fred Michel. Fred is a biosystems engineering professor at Ohio State University here at Wooster. So we'll look forward to having Fred here with us. So with that, we will adjourn. Have a great week, Rotarians.